What's up, everybody? Today we're going to teach you how to shoot portrait photography. Now the first thing we need to do is compose the frame. To do this, we're going to go outside and we're going to walk around for a little bit, see if anything catches our eye. Some of the things we can look at are patterns, interesting objects or landmarks, or even something as simple as a tree. Once we've found where we want to take the picture, it's time to light our subject. Now today is a pretty overcast day, so there's not a lot of light falling on our model. To fix this, we can use artificial light, so we've brought with us an LED light. When setting up your light, the most important thing to focus on is the separation between highlights and shadows. This will allow you to get the most depth out of your model. Now that our lighting's set up, we can move on to the camera settings. There's 3 things you need to know in order to take a good photo. Those things are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Your aperture, which is also known as the f-stop, controls the opening within your lens. This allows more or less light to be let into the camera. When your f-stop is set at a higher number, such as f28, your opening is really small, thus letting in very little amounts of light. Now when your f-stop is a small number, such as f2.8, it's going to be very wide and letting in tons of light. The other thing your aperture controls is what we call the depth of field. So when using a wide aperture such as f2.8, your subject is in focus while things in the foreground and background are very blurry. When using a small aperture such as f28, almost the entire photo is going to be in focus. The next thing we need to set is called our shutter speed. This controls how fast or slow the photo is taken. Your shutter speed is measured in seconds. So if we took a picture of a moving car at 1/200th of a second, it's going to be pretty crisp and clear. If we took a picture of the same thing at 1/10th of a second, it's going to be pretty blurry. This is called motion blur. Just like with aperture, your shutter speed also controls how much light enters the camera. With a slow shutter speed, the light has lots of time to enter. When using a fast shutter speed, there's very limited amount of time for the light to come in. The last setting we're going to talk about is called ISO. This is a reference back to film speed and actually the size of the sensor within the film. So the larger the number, the bigger the sensor was. This meant the film was much more sensitive to light. However, with higher numbers of ISO, grain becomes introduced into your photo. Sometimes we have to deal with this grain because our aperture and shutter speed need to be set at the specific settings, and so the only way to get more light into our photo is to ramp up the ISO. Now that we've learned how to set our camera up, we're ready to move into the final stage, which is taking the actual photos. The best advice that I can give about taking photos is to take as many as possible, because you're never going to return to the studio and think to yourself that you took way too many photos. However, you might go back and realize that you should have taken photos in a couple of different angles and maybe change your settings around a few times.